Last year, former Secretary of State Diana Duran went to prison for misusing campaign funds at casinos across the state. The Duran case raised many questions about who is keeping track of campaign finance reports filed by politicians. And we learned last fall that other elected officials have filed incorrect reports and needed to amend them later. Now, who makes sure that donations and campaign spending is accurately reported? This week, correspondent Gwyneth Dolan takes us to the Roundhouse in Santa Fe to check in with 3 lawmakers who have sponsored legislation to increase oversight and accountability in the state's campaign finance system.
Senator Cotter, thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Nice to be here.
You have a bill that you say would encourage candidates to be honest. Do they really need to be encouraged?
Well, when I ran for office, I discovered irregularities in my opponent's campaign filings, and nobody had ever looked. And I'd like to have the Secretary of State's office be able to do a complete review of what we actually file. And the only way to do that is to have all candidates and all current legislators know that they have the ability to confirm the information in each of our filings, as we do them twice a year and sometimes 5 or 6 times a year.
You know, there's a saying in my profession, trust but verify. Is that the kind of thing you're going for here?
Well, I hope no one ever makes a mistake. But when everyone thinks no one's looking, there's room for mistakes or intentional activities. You know, when you file a word, I could file your name as being the recipient of one of my checks, and frankly, no one's going to be able to prove it unless they get a court order.
So what would your bill change?
My bill would allow the Secretary of State's office to go into any audit potential, any audit candidate, and look to confirm that the words I used to say who I wrote the check to, frankly, how much the check was written for, is actually on the check and actually in the bank. Without that, I could say I wrote the check to you for advertising and actually write it to myself and cash the check. So that's the area which I think is missing in our Secretary of State's office. We can do that now through a court order, but they don't do very many court orders unless they have a really large, normally press-exposed event.
So are you saying that if candidates and elected officials knew that the Secretary of State had the power to go into their bank accounts and check up on their reporting, that they'd be more inclined to be honest the first time?
The bill also requires that if the Secretary of State wants to get into a particular campaign account, they have to write a letter to the owner of the campaign account. So now we require them to audit 10% of them. It's possible that 10% of the legislature, or for that matter, statewide officials, are going to get a letter. We're going into your account. And as soon as that gets around, absolutely, the opportunity for changing the way you wrote your checks after the fact, when you say, oh, that didn't work out quite as well as I was hoping, I'll do it a little different, they won't be able to do that. And so now with those warnings, people won't ever even try because the risk is just too great.
Representative Steinborn, thanks so much for talking to us today. You know, you've been working on lobbying disclosure for a while now. You had some success last year, and you're back this session with 3 different proposals that would give the public more information about money in politics. What are you trying to do?
Well, the big kahuna is full disclosure of all lobbying spending in the state. Right now, we have huge blind spots of spending that is occurring to influence policy that is not required to be disclosed. And what is required right now are, limited gifts and meals as far as the amounts that are spent. But when an industry hires an army of lobbyists to come and kill, say, predatory lending legislation, we have no idea how much money that costs. How many hundreds of thousands, maybe millions? We would never know. This bill would finally put a number and so require full disclosure of all lobbying spending. Second bill would require that lobbyists are required to report each specific piece of legislation they're hired to work on. Right now, the law is very vague and just requires that they report generally the issue that they're here to work on. We want to increase that and need to increase that disclosure significantly so that they would report the specific legislation that they're hired to work on. And thirdly, is a bill that would require that lobbyists report specifically each legislator that receives gifts, meals, and other expenditures, as the law says, whom they give those things to. Right now, they're not required to know that. So, and I think certainly the public has the right and interest to know who is being wined and dined and given dinners and gifts, and I think that should be public information, and so that third bill would do that.
Has the governor agreed to add these bills to the agenda for the session?
So she did give a message on that third bill. She has not given a message for full disclosure, nor the other one requiring lobbyists to report specific bills that they work on, but she did give a message on the one about listing the individual legislators who are given gifts by lobbyists and whatnot. So yeah, there is a message on that, and that bill is going to be heard.
So what's the opposition to your proposals?
Well, the first one obviously gets to the heart of the way this place operates and has for a long time. They hate it. Is that using too mild of a word? Lobbyists, and they have, everybody has a right to have a voice here. So that being said, they prefer to not have to disclose how much they're getting paid, and I'm sure the people that try to influence policy would rather not know how big that check they're writing to try to play ball and influence policy here. So no, it's kind of the holy grail as far as I'm concerned of transparency for lobbying spending here and lobbyist activity, and then they hate it. So it is very challenging reform, and it's why I really appreciate all your consistent interest in good government and transparency, because the public deserves to know this. We have a fundamental right to level the playing field on what we know and how we're able to evaluate if our government's working for us, So we need leadership at a high level to help encourage this reform, because it is so hard, and because the system internally within this building is working to try to put the kibosh on it.
Representative Romero, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have a proposal that aims to give the public a little bit more information about the way that money flows through the political system. What exactly is the problem that you're trying to fix?
So I think some of the problems that we've heard from my constituency as well as the general public is the fact that when you look up the reports online, there is some sort of discontinuity, and it's hard to, there's discontinuity in the fact that different names have different spellings, so there are different financial reports for different candidates. And then the fact on the opposite side, the lobbying side, is that there's not a distinction between if the lobbyist donated to a candidate, them personally, or if it was a company that they work for. So this is trying to clear up some of that.
So what is the point? Why do we need to make this easier?
Because I think it's important for the public to know who is financing various campaigns. I think that's very telling of candidates in particular.
And one of the things in your plan is that it would require a little bit more scrutiny from the Secretary of State's office. Is that right?
Yes. So this would be codifying the fact that the Secretary of State should definitely be overseeing reports as they're coming in to make sure that they're in line with what the campaign is saying and with the statutes in place.
So we've all seen news stories. I've done news stories about the way the Secretary of State's office doesn't, really check the homework here. So is enforcement what you're looking at?
I think enforcement is definitely part of the problem, but we also want to make sure that we codify these in statute, that the Secretary of State, that there is a process in line and in place to make sure that these reports are definitely being looked at, and they're also communicating with the campaign and the person involved. In the bill, it will state that there are two forms of notification. One is by certified mail, ensuring that there's a paper trail, somebody signed off on it, and they know that there may be an error in their report so that they can go back and address it. Say, well, perhaps it was an error on your side to the Secretary of State's office or what have you, so that the matter is taken care of.
And really, on a certain level, this has operated almost like an honor system where candidates and lobbyists just fill out the forms with information. They come in, the Secretary of State's office stamps them received, and in many cases, not much else happens. So what exactly would your plan change there?
Well, again, it's codifying it to make sure that there's a process in place and make sure that it holds up to public scrutiny, that there's definitely a paper trail that not only the Secretary of State's office could follow, but also the public at large, that you can go back, you have a searchable database where all these reports are aligned, both on the campaign side, but also on the lobbyist side. Part of the bill is requiring that there would be a searchable database by name, date, what have you, to ensure that whatever people are looking for, that it's easily downloaded and that they can look at to compare notes, so to speak.
So how is this going to change things for regular New Mexicans?
So I think for regular New Mexicans, they would have a clearer system to actually go back and trace campaign financing and who is receiving what and from whom and on what date. And I think they'd also have the reassurance that the Secretary of State's office is definitely working to the best of their abilities to ensure that everything's in alignment and make sure that the public is fully aware of these dealings.